We are now moving to our third paper, Behavioral Food Subsidies, an Experiment with SNAP. Presenter is Andy Brownback from University of Arkansas Walton College of Business. And our discussants are Erin Hinderlight, the Director of Policy at Benefits Data Trust, a nonprofit working on public benefit access, and Hosea Giuntella at Pitt's Department of Economics, who's a health economist. All right.
Sorry, I think I was muted. Can everyone see my screen correctly? Okay. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sarah, for organizing such an awesome conference. My name is Andy Brownback. I'm at the University of Arkansas, and this is a project, Behavioral Food Subsidies, that I've been working on with Alex Emos, who's at University of Chicago, and Michael Kuhn at the University of Oregon. And before I get too far, I want to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for some great feedback and support throughout this process. Oh boy, I'm making noise. All right, so I want to start by outlining the problem we're trying to solve with this project. And generally speaking, the problem is that for people who are on nutrition assistance in the United States, the dietary quality of the food they consume is relatively poor. For example, the fruit and vegetable consumption for nutrition assistance participants is about 50% of their daily recommended dosage. And this compares very unfavorably to the higher income non-participants who consume over 2/3 of the recommended amount. And this nutritional inequality it is problematic because it manifests itself as both a cause and a consequence of these greater trends in income inequality. So a cause insofar as poor nutritional quality leads to poor health outcomes, which are expensive and diminish lifetime earnings, and a consequence insofar as these higher nutritional quality diets can be expensive, right? And it's not just a short-term problem either, because we know that childhood nutrition, for example, for children who are on nutrition assistance, leads to adult health outcomes. And so it may be the case that if someone who's on nutrition assistance as a child has poor adult health outcomes and they're on subsidized healthcare as an adult, that there could be a win-win for the taxpayer, because a better nutrition assistance program could lead to lower costs in subsidizing adult healthcare. So when you see this problem, there's really two margins you could think of to improve it. The first would be a supply side problem, looking at something like food deserts and the availability of healthy food. And that's what Alcott et al. In 2019 looked at. And they really found very little impact of an expansion in availability of healthy foods. So what we're going to be looking at is the demand side factor, right? Existing research shows that this matters for nutritional quality. And the specific demand side intervention that we're going to be looking at are healthy food subsidies. So subsidizing the purchases of healthy foods. We're going to ask three behaviorally and theoretically motivated questions about food subsidies. So we're going to be trying to figure out behavioral interventions that make healthy food subsidies more effective at promoting healthy food purchases. The first question we're going to ask is going to be about agency. And when we say agency, we mean an expansion of choice here. So will giving shoppers an active choice over their subsidies enhance their effectiveness? So can this actually make these subsidies more effective at promoting healthy food? The second question is about waiting periods and whether prompting deliberation about the use of a subsidy prior to the ability to use a subsidy, whether that deliberation prompt could increase its use on healthy spending, the use of the subsidy. And this isn't about separating choice from consumption. That's going to be our third question, which is whether allowing people to make a subsidy choice in advance of a shopping trip could allow them to focus that deliberation period and further enhance the effect of that waiting period on promoting healthy food purchases. Okay, so this is kind of the setup. And with that in mind, I want to talk about the experiment that we designed to test these questions. Obviously, if you guys have any questions or clarification, feel free to interrupt. I think Erin's in charge of this. So, I stop when she tells me to stop. Our experimental design, this is a pre-registered nationwide field experiment with low-income shoppers. So all of our participants will be at or below 185% of the federal poverty line, which would qualify them for certain nutrition assistance programs, although not exclusively SNAP. That's at 130% of the federal poverty line. And we're going to test two 30% subsidies here. And the 30% subsidies will be worth up to $10 per trip. The two I'll refer to as the healthy subsidy and the unhealthy subsidy. Those are for fruits and vegetables and for baked goods, respectively. And of course, to the shoppers, they weren't known as the healthy and unhealthy subsidy. They were known as the fruits and vegetable and baked goods subsidy. The nice part about these categories first is that they are roughly equivalent shares of consumer expenditures. And there's a clear valence here. So anyone who plans to improve their diet kind of knows which subsidy that they should be selecting here. The way that we test these subsidies out is in partnership with a consumer research firm. And the consumer research firm operates through a smartphone app. So this gives us access nationwide to a set of shoppers and allows us to push surveys to subject smartphone to deliver these surveys, deliver the interventions, and deliver the payments all electronically in a very decentralized way, right? So we're able to impact people all across the country. And the smartphone data, the metadata from the surveys will allow us to verify, for example, when the surveys are taken and cross-reference them with the dates on the purchases to understand that verify that these were taken at the right point in time. And we'll also get geotags for all of these surveys to make sure that surveys that were supposed to be taken in the aisle of a grocery store were in fact taken in the aisle of a grocery store. So we can cross-reference these with the locations of grocery stores nationwide. So we can really access these shoppers at the point of purchase while they're doing their daily or weekly grocery shopping. Now, the outcome of interest that we pre-registered and the one that you're going to see in all these regressions is fruit and vegetable spending. So how much money do these shoppers spend on fruits and vegetables? And in the paper, we look at a couple other alternative measures, but for this presentation, you'll just see outcomes for fruit and vegetable spending. So let me give you an overview of what a shopping trip looks like. And then I'll tell you about our interventions, and then we'll detail the results. Some of the interventions will have a pre-shopping survey. If they have a pre-shopping survey, this will be taken 4 to 48 hours prior to going shopping. And it's going to be geotagged to make sure that people are taking these surveys before they're going to the store. So they're not taken at the grocery store that they subsequently shop at. And this is sort of a check and verify approach because we'll be able to confirm the timing of the pre-shopping survey based on the timing of the purchases. Every intervention will have a shopping survey. This will be taken while the shoppers are in the store, and it's going to be geotagged, so we'll know that they're in the aisle of the grocery store when they take this. The different interventions are going to see different shopping surveys, but they will all be taken at the same point in time relative to the purchases. So they'll be in advance of the purchases. Then the shoppers will make their purchases. They've been told to just conduct a standard normal shopping trip, any store they want, any time for any food that they would normally purchase. So we're not going to, it's a totally hands-off approach as to what they're shopping for, when, et cetera. The only requirement is that these should be 5 days apart. Okay, so we didn't want someone to go into a store 4 times in a row and just try to get the completion bonus for the study. We wanted these to be sort of natural shopping trips. Finally, they'll submit their receipts. This will be done immediately after shopping and after completing the shopping survey. Then after completing the purchases, we'll see the timestamp on the receipt submission. And these will be submitted through the smartphone app. So they'll simply take a picture of their receipt using their smartphone, and those will be submitted to us. We'll tabulate those on Mechanical Turk to calculate spending on each category. and then we'll send in an electronic payment for completion of the survey, as well as a payment to reimburse for the subsidized category. Every shopper will have the opportunity to complete this 4 times in a fully between subjects design. So if you're assigned to a treatment, you see that treatment and that treatment alone for 4 periods. We did not get 100% completion. These are, these are people we never met all across the country, but we did have a relatively high completion rate because we incentivized completion of all 4 repetitions of the shopping trip. So let me talk about our treatment interventions and the hypotheses that they test out. The first, right, control treatment. This is just, you go to the store, you go shopping, and you take a picture of your receipt. There's absolutely nothing interesting here. The restricted subsidy, this is sort of maybe a test of the standard sort of paternalistic approach to subsidizing foods. We say, look, we want to incentivize fruits and vegetables, so we're going to incentivize fruits and vegetables. And shoppers will walk into the store, they'll open up their smartphone app, and they'll see, hey, you've got a subsidy for 30% off of fruits and vegetables. Don't forget to take advantage of this. They'll go shopping and make their purchases, knowing that they'll be getting 30% off of the fruits and vegetables, and then they'll submit their receipts. Okay, this is kind of our approach that would most closely replicate existing studies by, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who studied a healthy incentives program. This is an exact replication, essentially, of that program. Now, our first question is about agency and whether giving shoppers this active choice over their subsidies could increase their effectiveness. So the way that we do this, we add an intervention that compares to this restricted subsidy intervention. So this is the one we just described, and we're going to compare that to an agency intervention. What we're going to do here is expand choice by giving shoppers the option of selecting an unhealthy subsidy. So they're going to be choosing between that healthy subsidy that all of the restricted subsidy participants received, or they could select an unhealthy subsidy that's going to give them 30% off of baked goods. Whatever they choose on this shopping survey, they'll then complete their purchases under those prices and submit their receipts. And then we will send them their subsidies back. Now, to generate predictions for what this should do, from a classical economics perspective, this is going to diminish fruit and vegetable spending, right? Because as long as a single person selects the unhealthy subsidy, what we've done is increased the average price of fruits and vegetables and decreased the average price of baked goods between the restricted subsidy and the agency intervention. And what that should lead to is a weak decrease in fruit and vegetable spending, right? So the average prices of fruits and vegetables would rise as long as there are some people who select the unhealthy subsidy, and that should diminish healthy spending. Now, from a behavioral economics perspective, there are reasons that this could make subsidies more effective. And the framework we want to put this in is the framework of a preference for consistency, where I make a subsidy selection and then I go make food selection that serves to justify my previously made subsidy selection. So if I select the healthy subsidy, I may be more motivated to select healthy foods to justify that previously made choice. And here are some citations for really nice papers that elaborate on this framework. Our second intervention is a waiting period intervention. And this is asking about whether prompting deliberation before shopping, before being able to use a subsidy, could increase that subsidy's effectiveness. Now, we'll compare this new waiting period intervention to that agency intervention I just described. And what the waiting period intervention is going to do is give shoppers a prompt during this pre-shopping survey that prompts them to deliberate about their choice of subsidy before they have the opportunity to make that subsidy choice. So what they see is on the pre-shopping survey, they see a notification, don't forget on your upcoming shopping trip, you'll be making a choice between a healthy and an unhealthy subsidy. So think about how to use that whatever subsidy that you plan to select. Then they'll go into the store, and from that point on, their experience will look exactly like the experience of the agency intervention that I just described. So they'll make a subsidy selection, complete their purchases, and submit their receipts. So to generate predictions in this environment, turning to classical economics really doesn't give us any predictive power here, because if we have time invariant preferences, then a simple notification about a choice to be made in the future isn't going to either affect the subsidy choice made nor the use of that subsidy on food purchases. Again, from a behavioral economic perspective, we do have some predictive ability here, but it's really important to note where this predictive ability is not coming from. So it's not coming from a model of time inconsistent preferences like beta delta preferences or quasi-hyperbolic discounting, because the timing of the decision, that is the subsidy choice and the consumption, those remain the same. What all we're doing is changing a notification, a deliberation prompt, and tagging it on to the beginning. So neither of these models would predict any changes in subsidy choice or in food choice behavior. But the framework we're going to be looking at is a framework of prospection. So this is something like the Gabay and Leibson paper from 2017, or a Gilbert and Wilson 2007 paper, where I'm making intertemporal choices by running mental simulations over the future utility outcomes of those choices. And the further into the future the consequences of my choices stretch, the more noise with which I can run these simulations. And this noise mechanically creates myopia in my choices. So with deliberation, that allows me more time to run these mental simulations and will reduce the myopia in my choices, making them more future-focused and goal-oriented choices. And there's a growing literature looking at the role of these waiting periods on intertemporal choice. And I should definitely cite Alex and Mike's paper here. It's a really nice paper in a lab context and in a field setting as well, looking just at these waiting periods. So our final question is about early choice and whether moving that subsidy choice prior to the waiting period could focus the deliberation even further and enhance the effectiveness of that waiting period. So the waiting period I just introduced, we'll call the delayed choice waiting period. And there they simply saw, shoppers simply saw a prompt on the pre-shopping survey. In a new intervention we'll call early choice waiting period, what we're going to do is have people make the subsidy choice in advance of the shopping survey. And the thing about making the subsidy choice on this pre-shopping survey is that it's going to allow people this deliberation period in between the pre-shopping survey and the shopping survey to be focused exclusively on the subsidy that they've already selected. So while in the delayed choice treatment, this deliberation prompt could have been spent over either of these possible futures, in the early choice intervention, you're spending that deliberation time over a future that you already know will exist, right? The future where you have already selected the healthy subsidy or the unhealthy subsidy. From that point, the shoppers will go into the store, open up their app, be reminded of their previous choice, and then complete their purchases with the subsidized goods that they selected to be subsidized.
And just giving a 5-minute warning.
Awesome. Okay. I think I'm going to make it. I know it doesn't look like it. I'm confident. Okay, let's see. So from a classical economic perspective, again, this really shouldn't change shopping behavior or subsidy behavior. But from a behavioral economic perspective, there are a couple channels through which this may influence behavior. Now, returning to that beta delta, that quasi-hyperbolic discounting model, if you have time inconsistent preferences, then an early choice could overcome a self-control problem in the subsidy choice itself. So maybe I want to choose the healthy subsidy, but I go into the store and I see all these awesome baked goods, they look great, and I change my mind. Having an early choice could overcome that self-control problem. But what it can't overcome is a self-control problem in the use of those subsidies on food purchases. So conditional on the subsidy I select, making that subsidy selection early or late should have no impact on the food choice I make under a time and consistent preferences model. But under a prospection model, making that choice in advance might allow me more time to run those mental simulations over that specific, the use of that specific subsidy, and further reduce the myopia in my decision making. Okay, so that's the setup. I would ask if you had any questions, but Sarah already told me I'm running short on time, so I'm going to keep going. So we want to make sure the subsidies work. So what we do, here are our results. We pooled all of our subsidy interventions, and that's in the light gray bar here. And in the dark gray bar, this is the control group. So we see that when you subsidize something, people buy more of it. This is good. The law of demand holds. Demand slopes downward. This is all good news. But what it doesn't tell us is whether this is an income effect or a substitution effect, right? We've expanded the budget set here. So we want to make sure that we're not just buying more of everything. So we use baked goods as the comparison group. And that's because that was also a potentially subsidized group. And you can see that there's clearly a substitution effect operating as well, because baked goods are not purchased at a higher rate in the subsidized group. In fact, they're purchased at a significantly lower rate. These subsidies operate primarily at what I'll call the quasi-extensive margin, moving people from purchasing between $0 and $5 on fruits and vegetables towards these intermediate amounts of $10, $20, $15, $20. So the subsidies themselves, from here's a regression framework, you'll see that we see a 164% increase in fruit and vegetable spending over the control group when we pool all of these subsidy interventions. But this sort of aggregate measure doesn't answer any of our specific questions, so I want to get to those now. Our agency intervention, the first impact of our agency intervention that we want to check on is, what are people using agency for? What are the choice rates of the healthy subsidy, and do they differ across treatment? We see that the subsidy choice rates are very consistent across treatment. And this is really important because it means that if there's differences in purchases across treatment, those are not attributable to differences in subsidy selection rate, but rather are attributable to differences in the usage of the subsidies that are being selected. So we see a very consistent pattern in subsidy selection. We see very little changing of subsidy selection, and almost no people changing back to an original subsidy. So going from the healthy to unhealthy back to the healthy subsidy. But when we look at the impact of agency, we see a positive effect here. This is not significant, but what's really important here is that classical economics predicts a negative effect here, right? This should weakly decrease fruits and vegetables spent, and what we see is a positive effect. We can rule out small negative effects at a 95% confidence level. So we know it's not having anything more than say a negative 50 cent or so effect. And the point estimate is a 21% increase over the restricted subsidy. So this is increasing its effectiveness over a subsidy that guarantees that the recipient only receives the healthy subsidy. So this isn't an increase over control. This is an increase over that more paternalistic subsidy there. And 28% of our shoppers leave money on the table to over-select this healthy subsidy. And they do that at much higher rates than leaving money on the table in the other direction. So we think this is like a costly signaling of intentions here. Looking at waiting periods, we see a really clear positive and significant effect here. The waiting period, this deliberation prompt, has a 29% increase in the effectiveness over the restricted subsidy. So simply having people deliberate a little longer makes them make more future-focused decisions here. And finally, this early choice intervention, what we want to look at is the comparison of that delayed choice waiting period to an early choice waiting period. We see a 47% increase in the effectiveness over the delayed choice. The difference here is not significant, but it's important to note that this early choice intervention nests all of our interventions, the agency, waiting period, and early choice interventions, and increases the effectiveness by 61% over the restricted subsidy. And this in aggregate triples healthy spending relative to the control group. So when you combine all of our interventions, we see this massive increase in the effectiveness of any subsidies and a huge increase relative to a control group. Just to give you some takeaways, what's really nice about this study is we see about a 2 times multiplier. So every subsidy cost about $3.35, but induced over $7 worth of healthy spending. The agency intervention does not make subsidies less effective, which is really important. It means that the 78% of people who are choosing that healthy subsidy more than compensate for the 22% who choose the unhealthy subsidy, making this sort of an unambiguous welfare gain. We're increasing healthy spending while expanding choice. Clearly, these 22% of people are benefiting by having the ability to select the subsidy they prefer, while also we can achieve the broader policy goal of expanding healthy spending. And then we can combine our interventions to see triple the healthy spending overall. And this has a really straightforward implementation through existing SNAP portals. So the SNAP portal is already online, and many of these interventions could be adopted relatively quickly to that framework. So I don't know, I went over, didn't I, Sarah?
But I was just, you're good. We made an executive decision in the chat to give you your extra like 2 minutes because you were on a roll and you looked really close. So as Andy wraps up, any questions from folks? I don't see anything in the chat, but.
I know I went super fast and I'm sorry. There's a lot of moving parts.
So as people are thinking about their questions, Andy, I'll ask you sort of back to your last bullet that I a little bit cut you off and you were kind of grazing through, which is what really are the policy implications, right? I spend a lot of time thinking every day about people in poverty and access to needed government benefits. So I'm curious both what you think are the policy implications and what, from your research perspective, would be the next step.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways I would like to think about this being adopted into like the SNAP framework. One is the idea of subsidizing food groups is not new to the USDA. That's certainly something they consider. And I think the role of agency here could be a really interesting addition to that consideration, right? And we studied a very specific type of agency, choosing between a healthy and an unhealthy subsidy, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So from a sort of theoretical perspective, you could subsidize you could make different options for subsidy selection. And I think that buy-in, that active choice could improve the implementation of these subsidies. So conditional on wanting to subsidize food, we think these could really make things more effective. And we obviously don't, the direct question isn't necessarily our primary goal of saying, do subsidies work or not? But obviously we find additional evidence to support the role of subsidies in improving healthy purchases. So I think that would be, those would be kind of 2 key policy takeaways.
Yana has a question. Yeah. So I'm going to unmute you and let you ask your question.
Thank you, Erin. Your main dependent variable is dollars spent, and more precisely also dollars spent on fruits and vegetables. I was wondering if SNAP might even have data on calories, so that, because for 2 reasons. On the one hand, I would imagine that the non-healthy options might even be cheaper, unfortunately, in many times. So that would be nice to get at calories. And then also to rule out that there is some form of licensing. So now that I've spent more on and saved some money here, is indulge the right term? I indulge and I amp up on the calories that I buy.
Yeah, great point. So we didn't look at, we were doing all of this in our own data collection framework. We're kind of piggybacking off of people that are shopping nationwide that qualify for nutrition assistance. So we're not actually getting the data from SNAP. But what we could do, and we didn't, full disclosure, is look at the sort of code in the nutritional content of the food. So we haven't done this, and it might be pretty tricky with some of the receipts. But what we can offer in sort of refutation that people are using licensing here, that we don't see increases in the unhealthy food. So by expanding the spending on healthy food, we don't see any increases in spending on unhealthy food, and we see the ratio tilt towards healthier foods. That's not answering specifically your question of, are those unhealthy foods even unhealthier? And I think it would be a little tricky to code that in, but it might be something we should look at, is this a somehow even less healthy option on that side?
Jan, I can see you have a question. You want to go?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was intrigued by the early choice option, the effect of the early choice. And I was thinking about, maybe you can do counterfactual analysis given your existing data. So one possibility is like an exhortation planning treatment, where you tell your placebo group that, eating fruits and vegetables are really good for you in the long run. And how much do you plan to spend in your next grocery shopping trip, and how much do you plan to spend on fruit and vegetable? And so you would still have the planning part, right? And the early choice part and the planning part, but without the subsidy. And this one can just put it in the shopping app. Everybody can have their favorite shopping app, and it's like making a shopping list, but have a little nudge when you make your shopping list. I'm not sure if you can actually isolate this effect from your existing treatments.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And actually tying that into like the idea of making shopping lists in a certain sense, like this is a very natural thing that we do, and we know that it makes us sort of more deliberate about our purchasing. I'm not sure we would be able to isolate the specific effect of telling people, think about your, are you saying, are you suggesting a different treatment where we would have just asked people to think about their purchases, or are you saying there's a way we could explore our data that would isolate an effect that I haven't? I'm not sure.
I was thinking, if it's possible one can think of the early choice treatment as, you can decompose it into two separate effects. One is the early part, and the other one is the subsidy part. And so how much of that is attributed to the timing versus the subsidy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we never did the notification absent a subsidy, and I don't know if it would have the same weight in the absence of a subsidy. That is a really interesting question, and maybe one that we should look at in the future. Of, is this only powered by the fact that people are making these kind of careful, conscious decisions about relative prices, or is it the fact that people are planning for a really normal shopping experience, and you're prompting a little extra planning? I think that's a great question, and we didn't isolate that effect absent the monetary incentive there. But to turn back to Aaron's original question for policy, if it is the case that a deliberation prompt works in the absence of like these stronger push factors to eat healthier, that's a very clear policy implication that is essentially no cost, is just a text message reminder that, you know, your SNAP benefits are being delivered on X date. You know, come into or log into this app and think about the ways in which you want to spend them, or something like that. That could be a clear use of these interventions.